My name is Claire Harmon. I'm 34 years old. 6 weeks ago, I stood at the entrance of the Willow and Rose event room, the venue I'd spent 8 months planning, the night before my wedding. The candles were lit. White peonies filled every table. 62 people had been seated, and the air smelled like champagne and warm bread. And then the door opened. My sister-in-law Dana walked in uninvited. She hadn't been asked. She hadn't RSVP'd. There was no place card waiting for her at any of the 12 tables. There was, however, a seat reserved in her name, just not where she expected to find it. My fiancé Marcus saw her first. His hand found mine under the table. "Do you want me to handle it?" he whispered. I looked at Dana, her designer dress, her practiced smile, her complete certainty that she belonged anywhere she decided to show up. "No," I said quietly. "I've got this." What happened next, in front of my parents, my in-laws, and 60 guests, was 3 years in the making. And before I tell you what was written on that seat card, please like and subscribe, but only if this story genuinely resonates with you. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? I love hearing from this community. Now let me take you back to where this really started. Growing up in Knoxville, Tennessee, I was the kind of daughter my parents described as the easy one. My older brother Nate was charming, impulsive, and magnetic in the way that made everyone forgive him for things they shouldn't. He was 3 years older than me and had always been the center of our family's emotional universe. My parents, Sandra and Bob Harmon, Mom ran the household with an iron calendar and a soft spot for Nate that she never tried to disguise. Dad worked 30 years in insurance, taught us to be responsible, then stepped back whenever Mom's orbit pulled toward his son. Nate, 3 years older, golden, unaccountable. The kind of man who borrowed money like it was a handshake and forgot about it the same way. Me, the daughter who held things together, who showed up, who paid things back. Nate and Dana married 7 years ago. From the beginning, I tried. I really did. When I was 25, I hosted their first Thanksgiving as a married couple. I cooked for 9 hours, cleaned the apartment the night before, made Dana's grandmother's cornbread dressing from a handwritten recipe she'd emailed me. Dana arrived 40 minutes late, accepted every compliment on the food as though she'd contributed, and told my mother the rolls were a little dense. She hadn't brought anything. I told myself she was just nervous in new family spaces. When I was 28, I planned my bachelorette trip for friends, a long weekend in Savannah. I'd been thoughtful about the budget, kept it accessible for everyone, researched restaurants and tours for 6 months. Dana wasn't invited. She and I weren't close enough, and it was a trip for my chosen circle. When Nate found out, he told my mother I'd excluded Dana on purpose to humiliate her. Mom called me upset. I explained. Mom said, "Claire, you know how sensitive she is. Could you just be the bigger person?" I uninvited one of my college friends to add Dana to the trip. That friend hasn't fully forgiven me, and she shouldn't have had to. I told myself it was a one-time compromise, but the clearest moment, the one I returned to when I need to remember how long this had been happening, came 2 years ago. My grandmother, Nana Jo, passed away after a short illness. She and I had been close in the particular way a woman and her granddaughter can be when they share the same quietness, the same love of reading, the same tendency to say less than they feel. I was the one who sat with her those last weeks. I drove 4 hours round trip 6 times. I held her hand when she asked me to read to her. I was there the night she passed. Dana attended the funeral in a fitted black dress that my aunt later described, unprompted, as a lot. At the reception afterward, Dana pulled me aside and said, "Just so you know, your grandmother told Nate she thought you could be a little judgmental. I just thought you'd want to know." I stood there holding a paper plate of casserole with nowhere to put it. I never verified whether she'd said that. I should have known immediately that it didn't matter because Nana Jo was incapable of that kind of cruelty. But I spent 2 weeks internalizing it anyway. That was Dana. When Marcus proposed 18 months ago, I was happy in the way that felt almost disorienting after so many years of accommodating everyone else. He was steady, kind, a man who noticed when I went quiet and always asked the right questions. We'd been together 4 years, and I'd spent most of them watching him be confused by how little my family seemed to see me. "You planned their anniversary dinner," he said once, sitting on the edge of our kitchen counter while I was on hold with a florist. "From scratch, for 40 people. And your mom called your centerpieces a bit busy." "She has strong opinions about florals," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. "So do you. And you were right." That's the kind of man Marcus is. When we started planning the wedding, I made one decision early. I was not going to sacrifice the day to keep the peace. I'd spent a decade making myself smaller so other people could feel larger. Not this time. The rehearsal dinner was at Willow and Rose, a gorgeous restored mill event space 30 minutes from our venue. Marcus's family was gracious and warm. His mother Linda had cried when we announced the engagement and hadn't stopped being kind since. We were doing a seated dinner for 62. Immediate family, wedding party, a handful of close friends. Dana and Nate were not on the guest list. That was a deliberate choice. A rehearsal dinner is for your inner circle. Nate and I had a relationship that functioned on the surface. Birthday texts, holiday appearances. But we weren't close. And Dana had spent 7 years making it clear she viewed me as a minor character in my own family's story. I wasn't going to give her a front row seat to the night before my wedding, I told Nate 3 months before the event. Calmly, by phone. I said, "The rehearsal dinner is just immediate wedding party and close family. We're keeping it small and I hope you understand." There was a long pause, then, "Dana's going to have a problem with that." "Dana isn't in the wedding party," I said. "Neither are you." "She's family." "She's your wife. I love that for you. This is still my event." He hung up. My mother called 20 minutes later. What followed was 2 months of pressure I hadn't fully anticipated but probably should have. Mom called every 2 weeks with a new angle. Dana was devastated. Dana had mentioned it to Nate's boss's wife, who was apparently horrified on her behalf. Dana had been talking to people in the extended family and there was real concern about the signal it sends. I asked my mother once directly, "Has Dana ever apologized to me for what she said about Nana Joe at the funeral reception?" Silence. "Mom, has she?" "That was a long time ago, Claire." "It was 2 years ago. Has she apologized?" "She probably didn't mean it the way you took it." That was the answer. That was the answer that had been living underneath every "just be the bigger person" conversation for 7 years. Dana had never been asked to apologize for anything. She moved through my family like weather, something you accommodated, not something you held accountable. I held my boundary. The guest list did not change. But here's what I did do. I'd been working with my wedding planner, a brilliant woman named Teresa who'd been in the industry for 22 years and had seen everything. I told her the full story over coffee one afternoon in January. When I finished, she set down her mug. "Can I suggest something?" she said. I said yes. "You know she's going to show up," Teresa said. "Women like that always show up. So let's be ready." What Teresa and I built together over the next 6 weeks wasn't a trap. It wasn't revenge theater. It was simply a plan for what to do if Dana decided that my clearly communicated boundary was optional, which, based on 7 years of data, it probably was. There would be a seat reserved in Dana's name. Not at a table, not with a number and a centerpiece. At a small reception table near the venue's side entrance, the one designated for vendors and coordinators to check in. A simple folding chair with a proper place card. The same cream cardstock as every other place setting, with her name written in the calligrapher's hand. The card read, "Dana Harmon, reserved for uninvited guests." Teresa had suggested something colder. I softened it. I wasn't trying to humiliate her in front of 60 people. I was trying to show her clearly that I had seen this coming, that I was not surprised, that I was done pretending her behavior had no pattern. The rest of the staff knew the plan. The event manager, a calm woman named Priya, would greet Dana at the door and escort her to the seat. Politely, without drama. If Dana made a scene, Priya would offer to call her a car. We rehearsed it. The night of the rehearsal dinner, Marcus and I arrived at 6:15. The room was everything I'd imagined. Warm candlelight, soft string music from the quartet Marcus's cousin played in, white peonies and eucalyptus on every table. His mother Linda immediately found me and held both my hands and said, "Claire, this is just beautiful. You did this." And I had. I'd negotiated the florist down $800 by paying a month early. I'd sourced the lighting equipment independently to save the venue's upcharge. I'd spent 3 evenings addressing place cards by hand because the calligrapher's waitlist was full. Total event cost? $11,400, which Marcus and I had split evenly and paid ourselves. Because I'd decided long before this that I wasn't asking my parents for money they'd use as leverage. My parents arrived at 6:30. Mom looked beautiful and slightly anxious in a way I recognized. Dad hugged me and said, "You look happy, kiddo." He always said that and meant it. "I am," I said, and I was. The room filled. The wine poured. Marcus's father gave an early toast that made everyone laugh, and my maid of honor Jess squeezed my arm across the table. For 40 minutes, it was exactly what I'd wanted. Warm, close, full of people who actually knew and chose us. At 7:12, the door opened. Dana walked in wearing a halter-neck emerald dress, not a rehearsal dinner guest dress, something closer to what you'd wear to a gala. Nate was with her, in a blazer, scanning the room with the expression of a man who knew they weren't supposed to be there and had come anyway. Priya reached them before they got 10 steps in. I watched from my seat. I did not stand up. I saw Dana say something. I saw Priya respond. I saw Dana's smile stay fixed while something behind her eyes recalibrated. Priya gestured toward the side entrance table, discreetly, professionally. Dana looked in that direction. She saw the chair. She saw the place card. Even from across the room, I watched her read it. I watched her face change in the particular way a face changes when it finally understands that someone has been watching all along. Nate said something to Priya. I saw Priya nod and respond. Priya later told me he'd said, "This is a family event and we have as much right to be here as anyone." She'd told him calmly that the guest list was the couple's to determine, and that she was happy to call a car if they'd like to wait comfortably outside. Dana pulled Nate's arm. They had a low, tense conversation near the entrance that lasted about 90 seconds. Then they left. The door closed. The string quartet continued. I don't think more than a handful of people in the room fully understood what had just happened. Linda leaned over from 2 seats down. She'd been watching. "Did everything just get handled?" she murmured. "It did," I said. "Good." She raised her glass to me and we both turned back to the table. The texts started that night. Nate sent 7 messages between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. The first was cold. The last was long and raw in a way I hadn't expected. Something about how he'd always felt like he had to choose, and how maybe our family had let that become normal, and how Dana's behavior wasn't always something he'd known how to address. I read it twice. I didn't respond that night. My mother called the next morning, the morning of my wedding, and I let it go to voicemail. It said, "Claire, I'm not calling to fight. I just need you to know I'm proud of you. I know that might surprise you, but I'm proud of you and I'll see you at the church." I listened to that 3 times in the hotel bathroom while Jess curled my hair. The wedding was everything. Marcus and I were married on a Saturday in April, in the garden of the estate we'd found together on a road trip 2 summers before. 110 guests. My father walked me down the aisle and cried before we reached the end of it. Linda sat in the front row and held a handkerchief she'd clearly prepared in advance. Jess stood beside me and made faces during the vows that she will deny until she dies. Dana and Nate were not there. That had always been their choice, and they made it. 6 weeks out from the wedding, I've had one conversation with Nate. Phone call, 40 minutes, the most honest thing we've said to each other in probably a decade. He told me he'd spent a long time letting Dana's version of events be the one he operated on, and that the rehearsal dinner had been the first time he'd seen it from the outside and couldn't rationalize it. "I'm not asking you to fix things overnight," I said. "I'm just asking for honesty going forward." He said he could try. I'm cautiously willing to see if try becomes something real. Dana sent me a single text 2 weeks after the wedding. It said, "I think we both handled things poorly and could probably both apologize." I looked at that message for a while. Then I forwarded it to Teresa, who replied with a single word, "Classic." I haven't responded. I may not. An apology that asks me to apologize for protecting my own wedding is not an apology. It's a renegotiation. I understand that now in a way I didn't 3 years ago. My life right now looks like this. I'm back from a 12-day honeymoon in the Azores, married to a man who made me feel entirely seen in front of everyone we love. I'm working in project management and was promoted 4 months ago to a senior role I've been working toward for 2 years. A $22,000 salary increase that I negotiated myself without telling anyone in my family until the paperwork was signed. Marcus and I are saving for a home. We're building something patient and solid. My relationship with my parents is genuinely shifting. My mom and I talked, really talked, twice in the lead up to the wedding in a way we hadn't since I was in high school. She told me she'd watched me accommodate Dana for years and felt guilty for pressuring me to keep doing it. She didn't have answers for why she'd done it, but she said it, and saying it mattered. I still hold boundaries. I'm still the daughter who shows up, but on terms that don't cost me pieces of myself. If you're watching this and you recognize the pattern I'm describing, a family member who enters your space with entitlement and exits without accountability, and a system around them that treats your discomfort as the problem, I want to say something directly to you. You are allowed to plan for what you know is coming. You are not obligated to be surprised by predictable behavior. A boundary isn't cruelty. A reserved seat with an honest label isn't a weapon. It's just a mirror, placed where someone can finally see themselves clearly. You don't need to stage a confrontation to prove your worth. You don't need a dramatic speech or a revelation that floors a room. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply not move out of the way. I spent years making space I didn't have to make. I moved my friend off my own bachelorette trip. I swallowed what was said about my grandmother. I stayed small so Dana could feel large. The night of my rehearsal dinner, I didn't do any of that. And I've never felt more like myself. If this story reached you today, I'd love to know. Have you ever held a boundary that someone called dramatic? What happened when you didn't move? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one. If you're new here, please subscribe. These are real stories about real moments, and I'm glad you found this corner. Take care of yourselves. You deserve the room you were already standing in.